It began quietly, as most catastrophes do. The first reports were dismissed as sensationalist news. Rumors of a strange illness spreading in a small town in rural. Janus people were acting erratically, attacking their neighbors and exhibiting signs of extreme aggression. The media called it a new rabies outbreak, but those on the ground knew it was something far worse. The infection spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within days, entire towns were overrun. The infected ants. Humans were now something else. Their eyes were milky white, their skin gray and rotting. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh. They were the dead, reanimated, and they were unstoppable. Phase 1, the collapse. The government tried to contain the outbreak. Quarantine zones were established, and the National Guard was deployed. But it was too little, too late. The infection spread through bites, scratches, and even the air. In some cases, panic set in. As cities began to fall, New York City was the first major metropolis to collapse. The sheer density of the population made it a breeding ground for the undead. Skyscrapers became tombs as people barricaded themselves in their apartments, only to starve or be overrun. The streets were a nightmare of blood and chaos, filled with the screams of the living and the guttural groans of the dead. In Los Angeles, the highways became death traps, and millions tried to flee, but the roads were gridlocked. People abandoned their cars and ran, only to be picked off by the hordes of zombies that emerged from the shadows. The city burned as desperate survivors set fires to slow the advance of the undead. But the flames only added to the destruction. Washington, D.C. fell next. The government evacuated to secure bunkers, leaving the rest of the country to fend for itself. The president addressed the nation one last time, encouraging citizens to stay calm and stay indoors. But by then, no one was listening. The power grid failed, communication networks went down, and America was plunged into darkness. Phase 2. The scavengers engaged in the aftermath of the collapse. The survivors banded together in small, desperate groups. They scavenged for food, water, and weapons, moving from place to place in search of safety. But the zombies were not the only threat. Lawlessness reigned as gangs and warlords took control of what little remained. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. One such group, led by a former Marine named Marcus, struggled to survive in the ruins of Chicago. They had taken refuge in an abandoned shopping mall, fortifying the entrances and living off canned goods from the stores. But supplies were running low and tensions were high. One night, a horde of zombies breached the mall's defenses. The survivors fought valiantly, but they were overwhelmed. Marcus watched as his friends were torn apart, their screams echoing in the cavernous halls. Managed to escape, but the experience left him broken and haunted. Phase 3, the New World Order. As the months turned into years, the world changed. The zombies began to decay, their bodies breaking down until they were little more than bones. But the infection had mutated and new horrors emerged. Some of the infected retained a semblance of intelligence, forming packs and hunting with terrifying efficiency. Others became grotesque, bloated creatures that spewed toxic bile. In the Midwest, a cult known as the Children of the Plague rose to power. They believed the infection was a divine punishment and sought to spread it further. They captured survivors and fed them to the zombies, believing it would hasten the arrival of a new world. Their leader, a charismatic madman named Ezekiel, preached that only through death could humanity be reborn. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Colorado, a group of scientists worked tirelessly to find a cure. They had isolated a strain of the virus and were experimenting with a potential vaccine, but their work was slow and their resources were dwindling. When the children of the plague discovered their location, the scientists were forced to flee, taking their research with them. Phase 4, The Last Stand. The final chapter of the apocalypse unfolded in the ruins of Las Vegas. The city, once a symbol of excess and indulgence, was now a desolate wasteland. A coalition of survivors had established a fortified settlement in the remains of the Luxor Hotel, using its pyramid structure as a stronghold. But the zombies were not the only threat. The children of the plague had amassed an army of fanatics and were marching on the city, determined to destroy the last bastion of resistance. The survivors prepared for battle, knowing it would be their last stand. The battle was brutal and bloody. The survivors fought with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. As the walls of the Luxor fell, Marcus, now a hardened and ruthless leader, led a desperate charge to buy time for the scientists to escape with their research. He sacrificed himself, taking down as many of the enemy as he could before being overwhelmed. In the end, the survivors were scattered and the city was lost, but the scientists escaped, carrying with them the hope of a cure. They disappeared into the wilderness, determined to continue their work and one day reclaim the world from the horrors that had consumed it. Epilogue. A glimmer of hope. Years later, the world is a very different place. The zombies have mostly decayed, but the infection still lingers. A constant threat. The children of the plague have fractured into warring factions, their influence waning, and in a hidden laboratory deep in the mountains, the scientists are on the verge of a breakthrough. The story of the zombie apocalypse in America is one of lost despair and unimaginable horror, but it is also of resilience, courage, and the enduring hope that one day humanity will rise again.